Talk to me about house music and house music culture and the pieces of the history that you think are critical for us to remember.
Well, I think, particularly when we're talking about Jersey, like I think Jersey really kept the vocal tradition of that was coming out of soul and disco alive in the period from the Disco Sucks movement in 1979 to when the UK started becoming very interested in Chicago house. All through that period, Jersey was still putting out records that really spoke to the gospel foundation of dance music. And I think it's very interesting that Zanzibar, which is kind of like, the big place when you're talking about Jersey house, or club music. Because, I mean, really, we back in the early 80s, we were just calling it club music, especially Jersey. Jersey was known for club music. That's the way we would call it. But I think it's interesting. Zanzibar opened in 79, which was the big year of the disco demolition and Disco Sucks. And then had this, heyday through all this time. So it really makes sense that people in Jersey would continue to be making new music for this huge happening culture that's happening at Zanzibar. And I think that's really one of the reasons why Jersey remained so strong. So then when the house beat came in, you just took the churchy vocals from Jersey and just maybe, sped it up a little bit, put a little house piano on it. And it was able to be such a continuum to the point where a lot of like records we know as like seminal house records aren't necessarily even Chicago records, but are actually Jersey records. Like when we're talking about the Adivas, when we're talking about the Jomandas and people like that. So
Zanzibar was it was in the Lincoln Hotel. Yeah, I've been in there a few times. It was a nice club. It was kind of big, spacious. It was, well, that's another thing. It wasn't just gay club, they were mixed clubs. We didn't have a problem with the people over here in these type of clubs. If you had a gay club, you better believe half of it was straight. That's where the clubs were back then. Yeah, mixed sexually, mixed racially, yeah.
Zanzibar was a club where you could go. The music was hot. The people, it was like, people would work all week and then they would want to come and relax and enjoy themselves because you could meet your friends there. And for a lot of folks, they could come and be openly gay there where they couldn't be in the streets or whatever. And my friends would always say to me, we'll meet you there. And I said, what do you mean? I said, because, for me, I could not live that closeted life. I was openly gay. So if you saw me on the street, you could assume that, okay, yeah, he's that way. But you could go to the Zanzibar and dance and have a good time and meet people. And you could tell by how packed the dance floor was, whether it was a good DJ or not. And then we would go, we would start our evenings off at Murphy's. And Murphy's was a wonderful place. During the day, I would say like when it opened like at 10 in the morning till like 5 o'clock, it was like a straight businessman's club, where people from the area would come in, get a sandwich, a drink or something. Then at 4 o'clock, it would flip to being a black gay bar. The different bartenders would come in, the doormen, and then we would party and have a good time. And you could always see a crowd of people standing outside, smoking, and a lot of them are generally smoking weed. But seeing that, and the first choice. And then on weekends, a lot of times we would go into New York to Christopher Street or the Village. That's when the Village was totally different. But then we'd also go to the Paradise Garage. I'm sure you've heard about that. Oh, my God. That place was legendary. And I tell people the most memorable time we had there was either when Grace Jones showed up with her crazy self or Patti LaBelle. And then another time they did an evening with Bette Midler. And Barry Manilow was her accompanist on the piano. But, that's where you could just go, and you go in at 11 or 12 o'clock and leave 9 or 10 o'clock the next day. You come out and the sun is up. Or we would leave First Choice or Zanzibar at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and some people would either go home and change, or you could go right to work. That's what we would do. But we could just party and have a good time. And also, back then, it was losing friends, like people, especially when men, the guys that were dying from HIV and AIDS and their families, wouldn't even allow people to come to the funeral or whatever, because normally they would just do a closed coffin. And no one, they would always put in the obituary, died of cancer, died from a sudden illness or something.
And it's wonderful that, all of this history is being recorded because, as they say, if you don't record your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I would not like to see us go back to the days, the early 80s, when this, HIV came along.
I feel like we could hold on to a couple things, right, after slavery. A fraction of our hair culture, a good percent of our food culture, we just recreated it the best we could with what was here in music. I kind of put that together with storytelling because I realized how important music and dance are in storytelling and religious practices in a lot of African countries. Us holding on to that was really important, and I always felt like music and dance for us was always more spiritual than recreational.
One of the sort of theories behind the dance form Vogue from ballroom culture, ball culture, is it is a way to process bodily trauma, but two is that we know how to do it through the ancestors. A lot of it looks like hieroglyphics, the 90 and 45 degree angles of all the lines of voguing, but also storytelling. It's a oral tradition through somatic gesture, and so feel a little bit possessed when you do it, and it's coming from some sort of spiritual place. I used to work at Northeastern University, and so on Huntington Ave, and I would rent out the dance studio in the Commons, and once a week, every Friday, because it just made me feel good. And eventually, I got to the point, because I was the only one checking it out, that I was doing some of the most femme choreography I used to learn in my bedroom alone, out loud, lots of Janet Jackson stuff. And then I moved to New York to finish school, and I took this class called Vogueology, and it was a breakthrough. And so if from my bedroom to the studio, to a larger classroom at studio on 14th Street here in New York City, to balls where everybody's doing it. And it becomes, when there's a congregation of folks there voguing and cheering for it, and there's an MC who acts like the pastor, and the DJ is the choir director, and there's a congregation of folks just cheering you on and shouting to the sky. And so there are so many different themes, and between church, ballroom, but house music too. I mean, so many of those tracks are just gospel songs with 180 BPMs. A lot of house music is gospel tunes of the same name. There But For the Grace of God Go I is the name of a disco house track. And when you're on a dance floor, I don't know about you, but I definitely feel it's a hallowed space. And a familial one.
The visibility was there. It was just people weren't afraid of being themselves. So they just came out of the closet. And that didn't start in the 90s. That started in the 80s. Yeah, because somewhere in early to mid 80s, everybody was they wasn't hiding. That's when punk was out and everybody was blending in together. A lot of the same people hung out together. The gay kids and the punk kids all hung out in the same club atmosphere and hung around together in restaurants and stuff like that. And they all emerged because the punk that was back then was the lively colors, the pinks and the neon blues and greens and stuff. And the gay kids some of them wore clothes like that in all the clubs that they had downtown. whether they were straight or gay, that's where the party was. That's where everybody went.
All that I know with Zanzibar, first of all, you have Tony Humphreys, who was a straight man, but he was a DJ, and he kind of was the curator of this whole experience.
Right.
And I love that. I love moments when we're talking to each other, when we're not necessarily having to go off on our spaces, but we're having like intersectional social spaces. And I know Carl Bean, the singer of I Was Born This Way, he talks about how he would go to this place. I actually wrote it down. It's called the Four Leaf Deli in Newark. And apparently that was a space like straight people, gay people all around. So I remember I used to party a lot in Baltimore at Paradox. And that was the same thing. It was like straight people, gay people, but it was all coming together under this collective club consciousness that has very specific values about unity and coming together and being spiritually grounded and being socially aware. Like, people coming together for these reasons that are at the crux of club music, that are just themes that just run throughout club music. One thing I heard Nile Rodgers recently say, because he was used to be like an organizer in Black Panthers, and then he was making disco records, and he said his organizing was far more effective making disco records than when he was organizing with the Black Panther Party, because he wanted to bring people together. And here he did make one record called Everybody Dance. And you can look at the dance floor, and all these different people from different backgrounds and different races and sexuality and stuff are all coming together to dance.
But then I got into breakdancing. It was really my first real thing, connection to music was breakdancing. And I remember hearing Sugar Hill Gang. And when I heard when I heard that, my life was like just forever changed. And that's actually my favorite album in the history of music. That's my favorite album. And that's how it started for me. And I started I was probably about 11 or 12. And I started breakdancing with kids that were like 18, 19, 20. And I started picking up like so many different techniques and got really good at it, started battling. And I literally battled Deuce Martinez. I didn't even know it was him back then. At the mall, at the Woodbridge Mall, he came out with his group, and they slayed us. Like they were from New York. We thought New Jersey was the bomb, but they came in and they just slayed us, right? They in my household, it was all about music. And there was from Latin music to rock and roll to I was ashamed of who I was for a long time, and it had a lot to do with society. Like, I felt like I needed to fit in a certain box, and I would have people tell me, "Oh, you don't look gay." I'm like, "Well, what does gay look like?" I was afraid to just be me. I hid it from my family for a long time. And, when I was about 25, I came out about 25, 26. I came out to my family. And, I always say this, heterosexual people don't have to come out to their family. Like, really, why did I have to come out to anybody, right? I should have just been able to be me. And so, it means a lot to me now that I can just be me. And I hope that it inspires other women that, are afraid, and that there's so many people. So it's unfortunate. There's so many kids taking their lives because they're just not accepted. It's sad.
When Adiba said respect, everybody knew exactly what she meant. Everybody knew the reference. It was just all there. And there's just something that I love about just sort of the continuity of the Black voice and keeping that as part of house music. Like, when I go to a club, I don't want to just hear beats for hours and stuff like that. I need some words. Like, I need some inspiration. Just like when you it would be like going to church and you get up there, you sit up there, and the preacher just got up there and didn't say anything. Just like, You know what I mean? Like, right, I go to church to be inspired to get the good word. I want the good word on the dance floor in the same way. And if I don't get it, I'm gonna feel a certain type of way.
Yeah, it's the call and response, right? It's the engagement.
you.
It's the being touched by the spirit. It's the, it's losing yourself like in the vibrations and the energy. I mean, it's, house folks love to say it's a spiritual thing, and they're not lying, because it really, to be able to transcend in those moments, it is a safe space. Even if the rest of your life is not safe. Socio-political context of Black people in the U.S. in the 70s and 80s and 90s, we're not looking at great times, right? So if you can transcend even for a chorus or a bridge, right? That's survival.
We were singing good times, but it wasn't necessarily good times. Yeah,
Okay.
There was a certain period of disco that reflects sort of the aspirations that were coming out of the civil rights movement and sort of the immediate sort of effects of the civil rights movement, and just the promise that the nation was going to a better place. Right. I think that fueled the sort of glamour and the aspirational quality of disco, and even much of sort of soul in the, not crossover in the 80s, but soul in the 80s. When you think about like the Luther Vandross and the Sade and the Nita Bay, that's very kind of aspirational. Maybe you get your plush little penthouse because you got your little job, and you got, and so you have a certain stability that your parents didn't have. Right. Unfortunately, that for Black people, that just didn't last very long, because very shortly we had the sort of Reaganomics and the cutting of social programs, and then we had the introduction of crack. So, it was a very short-lived time, but club music has the continuity through all of that, because club music never stopped talking about, someday we should all be free. Can't we all come together? I'm thinking about, I believe they're from Jersey, the duo On Top, but their song Unity. And, just all of these all of these values that are found in club music that are sort of like survival, the things we need to survive. Right. Exactly. That's what makes club music so vital. And one of the things, Wesley Morris of the New York Times makes the argument that the reason why African-American music is so relatable to people around the world is because it's rooted in a sense of searching for personal freedom, a search of emancipation that in some ways is existential. In some ways, people go through that on an individual level, but people that are marginalized go through it on an individual level and on a collective level. And depending upon if you were like, how many sort of marginalized categories that you can do this multiple times, but that makes it relatable. And I think the same thing with the sort of Black queer experience with club music, that it's all about being free. It's all about emancipation. It's really taking those things and running with it, because things for Black queer people didn't really change with the civil rights. A lot of the keep on pushing, a lot of those movements a lot of those messages that were so much a part of R&B songs of the 60s shifted and became part of club music. That's one of the things that I love most about being Black, that I love most about Black people. But at the same time, I do hope for a day when we aren't always in survival mode, because that's no way to live for generations and generations.
Hey, podcast listeners. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Black House, Black Joy podcast. Our storytellers in the order of appearance are Jamara Wakefield, Craig Seymour, Shayna Wakefield, Ricky Tucker, Poochie Revlon, Donna Ransom, and DJ Millie Mills. Special thanks to the Queer Newark Oral History Project for your collaboration on this episode. We dedicate this work to all we have lost on the dance floor and off the dance floor. Happy Pride. Oh, trust and believe we have the best production team on the planet. Special thanks to our producer, Shayna Wakefield, our editor, Kaylee Hepworth, our associate producers, Shantea King and Natalia Dumont, photography by Kano El Neen, music by DJ Ron V and Rosamir Mantry, Black House, Black Joy podcast is a production of WBGO Studios. Gratitude for production assistance from Corey Goldberg. If you are enjoying this content, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And until then, we'll see you next time in the house that New Jersey built.
This is serious, house heads. Let's talk about house music.